Friday morning, everybody. Welcome to the WLBB Community Voice program. Our show brought to you by Tanner Health System. You're listening to us on News Talk 1330 AM or on the FM dial 106.3 this morning. And you can watch us on Facebook Live this morning as we are streaming on Facebook. Good morning to everybody tuning in via Facebook. Very honored to have a gentleman with us this morning who we're going to talk to about some awards he's won, his travels, his military career, and this comes after it was announced he'll be inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. That's going on during a ceremony in November. Dr. John Henry Burson III is our guest this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And I do appreciate you coming out, and I hope we can get a lot out of you this morning and talk about it. You've talked with media plenty over the years, and more recently in the last 20 years, because you took a lot of trips overseas in military career. And we'll get into good detail about those. Okay. Grew up in Carrollton. You were born in West Georgia, grew up in Carrollton. Tell us about that. Tell us about growing up in Carrollton, and I guess how that affected your interest to get into the medical profession, and then eventually perhaps lead you into the military.
Well, sure. Growing up in Carrollton was a wonderful thing. I was born on Cross Street in 1934. And had a wonderful time then. You know, the World War II came along in 41. I was 7 years old then. And when I was 8 years old, my dad decided I needed a job. So he got me a job as a paper carrier. I took the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, but most of the Journal. And my paper route was Dixie Street and Tanner Street and a little bit of Cross Street, the street I was born on. So, excuse me, I had a wonderful time growing up in Carrollton, a wonderful town. And being 8 years old, my dad said I needed a job, so he got me a job with the Atlanta Journal. And taking those places in World War II occurring, I got to see the front page of the paper every day and kept up with World War II. And I had 3 aunts who lived with my grandparents because their husbands, my uncles, were in service. So the military was always a big part of my life, even though I wasn't a participant in it in those days.
So you heard their stories and saw what it meant to them to be part of that.
Right.
It would be intimidating, you think, for an 8-year-old?
Well, I was too young to be intimidated, so that's the nice part of it. It was just all adventure then.
I think one of your cooler jobs, this is before you were 16. And I guess was there a legal age to work at that point? I mean, I guess being a paper boy, it wouldn't be considered where they're going to hunt you down, but was there a legal age to be able to work at that point?
Was there a legal age to what?
To work, to actually be employed?
Oh, no. You could, if you could get a job, you could work at any age. I didn't get my Social Security card until 46. For a long time. The middle 2 digits on your Social Security number were the date that you got the Social Security numbers. I got it in 46. I was working at the Playhouse Theater at that time.
Dr. John Burson, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program. You had a pretty cool job at age 12, one that I'd be appreciative of.
Yeah. It was. When I was 12 years old, I took up tickets and sold popcorn at the Playhouse Theater. We had 3 theaters then: the Carroll Theater, the Playhouse Theater, and I'm trying to think of the third one. It starts with an A. It'll come to me.
But 3 theaters, I'm thinking the population was a lot less back then, too. But
yeah, but we had great programs on those. We had country singers come in and perform on Saturdays, and it was a wonderful time to grow up.
But you had a job with, this logo is familiar to you, too.
Oh, yeah. Right? Yeah, WLBB. I remember very clearly when WLBB opened up. It was on the 3rd or 4th floor of the People's Bank building. Those were great days. Hiram Bray was the primary announcer in those days.
I think I have him on an old record, actually, announcing some college football.
It's what now?
Announcing college football. I have him on an old record. It says WLBB.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, you graduated from Carrollton High School?
Correct.
And went on to Georgia Tech after that.
That's right.
Yeah, was that what your interest was, getting into engineering, or were you thinking doctor at that point?
No, I was thinking engineering because I couldn't pay my way through college except through the co-op system. So I went to Georgia Tech on the co-op system, and it was a great experience.
How do you get an interest in engineering growing up in Carrollton? Is that
My father was in the cotton business, and they used to grade cotton. They'd pull a little piece of cotton out of the bale, and they'd do it between their thumbs, and that would tell them what the grade of the cotton was. And they bought the cotton on that basis. And I went to Georgia Tech with him to a cotton grading seminar, and I was smitten when I was there. I said, this is really where I'd like to go to school. And when I graduated from high school, they had a co-op system, so you could go to school a quarter and work a quarter. And I did that for about 3 years.
And you know our Steve Graddick's a Georgia Tech alumni, too.
Yeah.
Okay, there's some kind of brotherhood there, some kind of bond, right?
Right.
Georgia Tech. Well, you went to school, and then you did you go to Emory immediately after?
Oh, no, I had two careers. After I graduated from Georgia Tech, I actually came back to Carrollton, and I was the chief chemist for a company here called Testwood Laboratories. We made adhesives for the back of carpets up in Dalton, so I stayed here for 4 years. In 1957, the Russians put up Sputnik, and I knew that engineering was dramatically changed. So I got in touch with a friend of mine at the Georgia Tech Engineering Experiment Station and told him I needed a job, and he said, well, come on up, we'll put you to work. So I left Carrollton in 1959. We moved back to Atlanta, and I worked at the Engineering Experiment Station and worked part-time as a graduate student. And I got a master's degree, and then I got a PhD degree, and I had started teaching at that time. And I stayed at Georgia Tech from 1959 to 1971 on the faculty of the School of Chemical Engineering, and also worked at the Engineering Experiment Station. Medical school was something that I'd always dreamed about, but I never had acted on it. And in 1970, I called the dean at Emory Medical School and told him, I said, I'm an associate professor of chemical engineering at Georgia Tech, and I would really like to go to medical school. He said, well, if you're serious, then take all the prerequisites and call me back. So I took all the biology courses, and I called him back, and he said, well, come out and we'll interview you. So I went through the interview process and found myself back a full-time student for the first time in my life as an Emory Medical School freshman.
And eventually you opened up your own business. Did you come back to Carroll County
Yes,
to do that?
Yes, I had a position on the Emory faculty, and I got a call from the mayor of Carrollton, and he asked me would I come down and look at the hospital here, and I did. And, you know, if you play on people's ego, you can get a lot of things done. And he told me, he said, you know, we really need you here. Well, Dr. Denny was the local eye, ear, nose, and throat. They had eye at that time. And he had just retired, and I came down, and I was just overwhelmed with the possibilities of Carrollton. So I gave up my faculty position at Emory and came back to Carrollton. It's been a wonderful experience.
And what you have office in Villa Rica right now, ear, nose, and throat?
Yes, I opened Carrollton ear, nose, and throat, and in 1998 we went up to Villa Rica, and Villa Rica had Tanner had bought the hospital up there, and Ralph Fleck and I built a medical office building there, and that started our practice in Villa Rica.
You working every day up there?
No, I just work 2 half days a week, just enough so I don't do honeydews all the time.
No, I hope it's okay. You're 84 years old, aren't you, Doc?
83.
83 years old.
Right.
Be 84 this year?
Right.
Or still
84 this year.
Right. And it's still a fit man. I mean, you're doing a good job. I mean, I hope I'm 46 and I don't feel as healthy as you look. But
well, I get around, but not as easily as I once did.
You do get around, and you still talk about some things that you want to do in your future. We'll do that after this break, and we will talk about this prestigious military award being inducted into the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. We'll do that after this break. We're talking with Dr. John Burson on this morning's Community Voice program on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3. And also streaming live on the News Talk 1330 Facebook this morning. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll come back after this message brought to you by Tanner Health System.
Who holds the key to your heart? Your spouse? Your children? Or is it your grandkids? When it comes to keeping your heart beating strong, you'll find Tanner Heart Care holds the key. With preventive services to keep you healthy and the region's largest network of primary care providers experienced in quickly catching cardiovascular problems, your heart is in exceptional hands at Tanner. That's because we're advancing health with state-of-the-art diagnostic care to ensure your heart is working properly. And should a problem occur, from heart attacks to irregular heartbeats, Tanner offers innovative care, so your heart can be there for the ones who hold it, strong and safe. Tanner Health System, advancing heart health with medicine beyond measure. To find a heart specialist, call 770-214-CARE or learn more at tannerheartcare.org.
WLBB Community Voice Program. Our show brought to you by Tanner Health System. We're on FM 106.3 this morning, also streaming live on the News Talk 1330 Facebook. Thanks to you for joining us. I'll try and take a look at some comments there and shout those out to the good doctor here if I get a chance to look at those during this program. Again, Dr. John Burson, our guest, Carrollton native and practicing physician. He's been inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and there's a ceremony coming up this November, and it sounds like the public's invited to attend that. How did you find out that you were getting inducted into this, that you were receiving this honor?
A good friend of mine, Wayne Waddell, who was a fraternity brother of mine. Wayne's from Bremen, and we were fraternity brothers. And he was shot down over Vietnam and was 5.5 years prisoner of war there. And I think Wayne's the one who submitted my name for this. To be honest, I'm a little embarrassed by being inducted into a Hall of Fame. There's so many more people that are deserving of that honor than I am. So I'm humbled by it.
Well, let's talk about your military career then. After this is, did you have any experience before you got into being a physician?
Oh yeah, I was. Most of my military career has been not as a physician. When I was at Georgia Tech, I was in the ROTC program. The Korean War was going on, and you had to be in some type of program like that, or you were subject to the draft. So when I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1955, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserve. In 1957, I went on active duty and was at Fort McClellan, Alabama. And they discovered at the end of our basic officer school there that there weren't any laws affecting people in the military then. They had the Reserve Forces Act of 1955, which expired in 1957. So they said, you can either stay on or you can get out after a year. So I said, well, I think I'm going to get out because I've got 3 kids and 1 on the way. So I opted to get out of the active military and went in the reserves and spent 30 years in the reserves. I retired from the reserves in 1985.
And I definitely want to talk about what happened after that. But as far as your participation in the reserves, what were you part of?
Well, I started off in the chemical corps, being a chemical engineer. They put you in something that's pretty close to what your specialty was. So I was in the chemical corps, and then later on I came back to Carrollton, was in the reserve unit here. I was in an engineer unit and then a combat engineer unit. And then I moved on to Atlanta to the Army Reserve Command. And at that time I was in charge of the reserve units in the state of Florida, so I did a lot of traveling down there. I went to medical school in 1971 and graduated in 1975. And I told the Army, I said, I'd like to transfer to the medical corps. And they said, well, that's nice, but you can't transfer to the medical corps. I was a lieutenant colonel at that time. They said, you have to resign your commission and start over. So I resigned my commission, and I was recommissioned in the medical corps as a captain. So I went from a colonel to a captain. And about a month later, I got a letter from the Army, and they said, I'm sorry, you're too old to be a captain, so they made me a major. And I was in a hospital unit in Atlanta from that time until 1985, when my 30 years was up and I retired. And I thought that was the end of things in '85.
And I do want to touch on what happened 20 years after that. But how about the friendships that you made? I mean, 30 years. I mean, you're probably going to have a lot of good friends. You talked about Waddell. You remained friends with. But how about some friendships that you had built during that time and maybe kept throughout the years?
Well, I had a lot of friends in Carrollton. You know, we lived here for 4 years before I went back to Georgia Tech. And, of course, I grew up here, so I had an awful lot of friends in Carrollton. And then I had a lot of friends from Georgia Tech that I went to school with there, and kept up with them during their military careers. Of course, the Vietnam War was going on, and Wayne Waddell, my fraternity brother, was shot down, and I had 3 or 4 other people in the Vietnam War. So I kind of kept up with my military buddies.
Mm-hmm. And you were writing paper letters at those points. I mean, now that, with the internet and email, obviously, the last 15, 17 years, I mean, do you take advantage of that and keep more in touch?
Right. And I got an email from the Surgeon General, let's see, when it was.
2005, right?
2005. I got an email from the Surgeon General, just a typical thank you for your service type email. At the bottom it said, by the way, we also have opportunities for you to go back on active duty if you'd like. So I sent her an email back, and I said, well, I'd certainly be interested. And
was that just going out to doctors at that point? That letter that was being sent out, was that just going out to doctors?
Yeah, that
was coming from the Surgeon General.
To the doctors who were still in the Army Reserve. I was retired, but I was still in the Army Reserve. That was in 2005. So I told her I'd certainly be interested, and she said, well, if you can pass all the physical requirements, we'll take you back. So I went out to Fort Bliss, Texas, and went through 2 weeks of what they call regreening, which was an abbreviated boot camp again. And
you're 70 years old here.
Yeah.
And you're going through this boot camp. Yeah.
Right. The next thing I know, I'm getting on an airplane in Texas on the way to Iraq. I had to pinch myself that this was really happening, but I found myself on the way to Iraq, and it was a great moment.
How did your family feel about that? About you taking?
Well, I think they felt okay about it. They were my children were grown by then, and we didn't have anybody at home, and my wife was glad to get me out of the house for a while. So,
but the conflict. I mean, think about the conflict in the Middle East. How they feel about having you over there. Not that you were going to be, put in some sort of action. I mean, but you really couldn't help it. You couldn't decide where you were. Couldn't make the choice of where you would go. Yeah. But how did they feel? Were they concerned about you being in that action?
Well, I'm sure they were, but I never worried about it. I don't mean that in any heroic sense of the word, but I was already 72. I'd already had a full life, so I figured that if something came along, it just came along. I'd already had a full life.
Still plenty.
But I had a great tour. My first tour was at what they call Camp Victory, which was at the Baghdad International Airport. And after I'd been there for about 3 weeks, they decided they'd open a clinic in Baghdad, downtown Baghdad. So we moved into the embassy then, and I worked there for about 3 weeks running a clinic. And I got a call one morning from the 10th Combat Support Hospital, which is about 2 blocks away. And I went over and saw a young Marine who had a nosebleed, and I fixed his nosebleed, and I met the colonel who was the commanding officer of the 10th Combat Support Hospital. And she said, you're an ENT over here, and you're working at this clinic? She said, you'll be working in the 10th Combat Support Hospital from now on. Well, the surge was going on at that time, and the big battle at Fallujah was going on. And so I spent the rest of my time working at the 10th Combat Support Hospital, and it was, I thought I knew something about trauma, having interned in residency at Grady Hospital, but it was just unbelievable, the wounded folks that we had coming in from Fallujah.
Do you think you were the oldest one over there at that time? Or were the other doctors get that same letter and go over there with you?
Well, we had a lot of active Army doctors there, as well as a lot of other reserve doctors who had volunteered the way I did. And there was no distinction among them. We just all kind of worked until we couldn't work anymore. There were just people coming in with their legs blown off, their arms blown off, and the incredible job they did in stabilizing these folks. At a combat sport hospital, you're not there to cure them, you're there to stabilize them. And we would stabilize these young GIs coming in, and a lot of times they'd be at Walter Reed Hospital the next day. So the medevac process worked extremely well back then.
You were in Iraq, 2 times in Iraq, 2 times in Afghanistan, right? And I believe it was your first trip to Iraq. I can't imagine that you took it to where the rest of us would look at that situation, but you had an infamous patient.
Well, I had an opportunity to work with Saddam Hussein. We had an officer there that was assigned to Saddam Hussein full time, and there was a changeover from the previous one to the new one coming in, and they didn't have anybody for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And so my commanding officer came in and said, "You got the grayest hair, so we're going to let you take care of Saddam until his replacement comes in." So I spent about a week or 10 days with him. He was a very interesting person.
What were those conversations like? Were there personal conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we had 2 real pretty nurses over there that were taking care of him, and Saddam's hormones were still working at that time, so he talked a lot about his nurses he had there. And I carried on just routine conversations with him. I asked him, what if they sentence you to death? He said, "Well, I'm not really worried about that. I've been threatened, and I had threats on my life many times." But he was a convivial guy. He was sort of like being in the room with Bill Clinton. He was all politician.
So you didn't see like a humility or humble that he was captured, and this was probably
he was not humble at all. He was somewhere between humble and arrogant. I don't know where that comes out, but he was a pleasant person to be around. If you're not under any threat from him, of course, he'd no telling how many people he had put to death, but he was an interesting person.
Dr. John Burson is our guest, another interesting person on our program this morning, and enjoyed talking with him here. Unfortunately, only have a half hour, so we need to take our final break here, and we'll come back with about 6 minutes before the 0900 hour when we'll hear national news and then local news, and then Glenn Beck is on the air from 9 o'clock till 12 o'clock noon here on News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3, and also Community Voice program streaming live on the News Talk 1330 Facebook this morning. Appreciate you checking in. We'll take that final break, and we'll come back again with about 6 minutes. Community Voice after this.
Who holds the key to your heart? Your spouse? Your children? Or is it your grandkids? When it comes to keeping your heart beating strong, you'll find Tanner Heart Care holds the key. With preventive services to keep you healthy, and the region's largest network of primary care providers experienced in quickly catching cardiovascular problems, your heart is in exceptional hands at Tanner. That's because we're advancing health with state-of-the-art diagnostic care to ensure your heart is working properly. And should a problem occur, from heart attacks to irregular heartbeats, Tanner offers innovative care, so your heart can be there for the ones who hold it, strong and safe. Tanner Health System, advancing heart health with medicine beyond measure. To find a heart specialist, call 770-214-CARE or learn more at tannerheartcare.org.
Welcome back to the WLBB Community Voice program, our show brought to you by Tanner Health System. I'm your host this morning, Colin Worthington. Our guest is Carrollton native and practicing physician Dr. John Henry Burson III. He's been inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and that ceremony taking place in Atlanta in November. Nice picture that I've seen of you that I think they sent out with the press release. I'm guessing that's a Penley
All right.
He doesn't draw just anybody.
No, it's not a Penley.
Is it not a Penley?
No, it's our local artist who does such beautiful work here.
The one picture. Have you had a Penley? I think I
have a Penley. Yes.
Okay, I'd probably just put those two together in my mind, but yeah.
No, this is a Nielsen. The one that they used was a Nielsen.
Is that the one they're going to put up in the Hall of Fame?
Right.
Again, that ceremony coming up in November, and the public is invited. I think you can get tickets to that event. Visit the Hall of Fame website, gmvhof.org. I talked about your first trip, and we take it that one of the biggest reasons that you've been inducted into the Hall of Fame is these trips, these last 4 trips that you took. We talked about the first one. You went back home, and you were called again, or were you still reaching out saying, hey, if you still want my help, I'm coming?
No, when I started this, I decided I was going to volunteer every 2 years as long as I was able to. So I volunteered again, and I went to a place really physically not far from where I was the first time. It was called FOB Clapper, which was the prison that took the place of Abu Ghraib when they closed down Abu Ghraib with all the horrific things that went on there. They opened up one there in the vicinity of the Baghdad airport, and the surge was going on then again, and we had prisoners coming in all the time. A school bus load of them came in every morning, and we processed those, and we would run across occasionally one of the deck of cards that they were looking for, the people who had escaped. So it was an interesting experience. It wasn't nearly as good as the first one. When I was in the 10th Combat Support Hospital, I was just doing routine physical exams and everything.
Well, Doug, it's been an honor to have you on the program. We've got about 2 minutes left. Why Carrollton? Why do you stick around Carrollton? I mean, I understand you speak 6, 7, 8 languages. And,
no. I speak a little bit of German. That's the only language.
Okay. How about you read the German Bible, though, to keep fluent, right?
I keep a little bit.
I was going to say, those are rumors that you hear around town. but why do you stick around Carrollton? I mean, you're born here, you've come back.
I was born here, raised here, and I love Carrollton. It's a wonderful place to be. My wife and I walk around and ride around, and we think how wonderful it is to live in the town that you grew up in. So it's a great place. I don't know any place on earth I'd rather live than Carrollton, Georgia.
And I don't know if you noticed, when we posted the story about the Georgia Military Hall of Fame, we put it on our Facebook, and that's just half the people that pay attention to us, listen to us on the radio, and they go to our Facebook page. And we had hundreds of people who liked that they were excited about that, and put great comments to you, hoping you would see the congratulations. I mean, so a lot of people are very proud of you and proud that you're from Carroll County. 1 minute left. What's next? Anything as exciting as traveling to the Far East or to the Middle East?
Well, Afghanistan was a totally different situation. I could talk for hours about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an entirely different place than Iraq. Iraq was very Western. You see kids with Nike shoes on and New York Yankee caps. Afghanistan was more like going back into the past. That they wore the robes and everything like you would expect from the Middle Ages, and it's just a much more primitive place, and I'm hoping we'll figure out a way to get out of there. Nobody's ever won a war in Afghanistan except the Afghans.
You going to work this morning?
Yes, sir.
Good deal. Well, thank you for coming out this morning. Again, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I know people at home enjoyed listening to you and seeing your mug on Facebook this morning.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for probably talking too much.
we could have talked for 2 hours. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to get as much information in as we could for this half hour. So thanks everybody for tuning in on Facebook Live this morning and listening on News Talk 1330 AM or FM 106.3. And of course, we'll put this interview up on our podcast portion of our website at newstalk1330.com. It is Friday. Everybody enjoy your weekend. Have a safe weekend.